Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Crouch, and this is Policy Talks, brought to you each month by the Williamson, Inc., our Chamber of Commerce here in Williamson County. We're got a bright-eyed audience here at Columbia State this morning on this in this beautiful campus here, and would invite anybody else that has never been here. You need to come over and check out this facility. We appreciate Dr. Lampley and Mary Beth and Dr. Smith, and now Rick Graham for making us feel welcome over here. Rick Graham, the former mayor of Spring Hill, is now Director of Development here. Is that right, Rick? And we're glad to see him on board with the crew here. So we have a TV audience with WCTV. Creed Henderson and his crew put us on the air there, and we have a radio audience over at WAKM, and Tom Lawrence makes sure that we get out to the far reaches of Williamson County there. So we welcome all of you. Our panel this morning is two of our legislative delegation from Williamson County, our state legislative delegation. Our Senate Majority Leader, Senator Jack Johnson, that represents the 23rd District, to become the 27th district, I think, at some point. When does that happen?
November 4th, whenever the election day is, in November.
Okay, so we're going to have to keep up with some new numbers then. We've got Sam Whitson, our state representative from the 65th district here in Franklin. And we've got two retiring state representatives that decided they couldn't make it this morning, and I understand why, because you guys have been working hard for the last 2 weeks, very hard. But Glenn Cassida and Brandon Ogles are not here, and Todd Warner, who has been joining us some, is not here this morning. So we're going to talk about them, but we'll let Jack and Sam do most of the talking. You got done yesterday, and the last time I talked to anybody a couple of days ago, it sounded like you had another couple of weeks of work to do. So how did that happen? Jack?
Well, we did. We adjourned. Sine die is the term. I believe that's Latin. I'm not sure. But we adjourned sine die yesterday afternoon about 3:30, I guess, both the House and the Senate. And so wrapped up the 112th General Assembly. Every General Assembly is 2 years. In 2 legislative sessions. So you have the first session of a General Assembly and you have the second session of a General Assembly. And obviously this was the second session of the 112th, so we wrapped it up and adjourned sine die. It's very difficult. People are always asking, when are you guys going to wrap up? When are you going to get done? My wife is asking, when are you going to get done? And it's very, very difficult to pinpoint. And the reason is, like anything in life, all of the difficult things get pushed to the end. You know, it's just a natural process of procrastination. Sometimes procrastination, sometimes it's a complex, difficult issue that needs more time and more negotiation. You've got the House, you've got the Senate, you've got the governor, and people are negotiating and trying to work out these complex issues. And it's just really hard to pinpoint because that might take an additional week. It might take an additional few days. The other thing you have to throw into the mix, which we did have this year, there were a couple of things that were moving through the legislature that the governor was not a fan of. And so he never really threatened to veto, but you have to contemplate the fact that if we pass something and then the governor vetoes it, then we want to stick around to potentially override his veto. So you've got all these different procedural things that go into the mix. The good news is we all came together in alignment this week. We passed the budget last week, and some of these more complex issues, which we can talk about and get into today, we were able to negotiate between the House, the Senate, and the governor, and land the plane, as we say. So we brought the plane in for a landing. But we had a really, really good session this year, Dave. We'll talk about, I know, a number of the things. We passed a really good budget. Tennessee is in great shape, and we're prepared for the future.
One of the good things about this session, last year we didn't sine die. We adjourned at 3:30 a.m. Yesterday we adjourned at 3:30 p.m.
Which is better.
Yeah, much better and better government, I think, at 3:30 p.m. So, and Jack hit on it, a lot of the more complex stuff gets pushed toward the end, and a lot of that has to do with the final budget that comes in that we work with on the governor the last 2 or 3 weeks. And for instance, in finance, on the House side, there's finance sub and finance full. And so a lot of the bills that we hear throughout the year get what we call put behind the budget because we don't know where we're going to be, how much money we're going to have to spend. And we're talking about hundreds of bills. And so we listen to these bills all throughout the year on Finance Sub, which I'm proud to be a member of. Our chairman, Gary Hicks, is an incredible legislator and a wonderful person and friend. And then our Finance Full chairman, I call her the new Charles Sargent, Patsy Hazelwood from Signal Mountain. She does a great job also as our Finance Full chairman. So we listen to these bills throughout the year, and they all get put behind the budget in Finance Sub. So the last week, they take like maybe 160 bills. They find out how much money we can spend on those, and we all have to go through probably about 80 of them. There's money enough for those. So we listen to all those bills on Tuesday morning, and we're in what we call a flow motion. We can move it up where they have to wait a week. We can do it all within a day. So we listened to 70 bills Tuesday morning, and we passed them to full. And then an hour later.
Detail, I'm sure.
Oh, in detail, yes, because we've already heard them once, okay? So on Tuesday morning after Finance Sub, we move them on to Finance Full. Well, I'm on Finance Full, so we get to listen to them again, the other 70, 80 bills in Finance Full. Then after we pass them out, they have to go to Calendar and Rules that afternoon. So I get to listen to them again because I was number 70 in Calendar and Rules. So then we get to listen to them again on the floor. So we have pretty good knowledge of the bills if you're on finance. And so when we look at these bills that we fund from behind the budget, we make sure try to look at a statewide application. What's good for most of the state? And there's some specific bills, like, for instance, a library coordinator bill we had, or establishing a compact for licensed professional counselors with other states. And so it's just really is a tedious process. It's a lot of time spent listening and listening to the other 10% who do 90% of the talking up there.
Jack, you're in a particularly interesting position as Senate Majority Leader because you have to carry the governor's bills, some of which apparently weren't very popular this year. Or maybe you were representing the governor on, how does all that work, and how do you deal with when the governor is not particularly in line with what the leadership wants to see happening? So,
well, you can think about it from a couple of different directions. You're right. As Majority Leader, I do sponsor the governor's legislative initiatives, including the budget, which is the most important bill we pass every year, the state budget. But it's a two-way street. It's my job to advocate for the governor's legislation, which 99 times out of 100 I'm happy to do. We're all aligned. It's a good bill. Everybody's in pretty broad agreement about what the governor's trying to do. But it's also my job to push back the other way and tell the governor, I'm not crazy about this particular thing you want to get done, or my members are not that crazy about this particular initiative, and so let's sit down and see if we can figure it out, amend it, change it, and get something done. But generally speaking, again, we're blessed as Republicans to have Republican supermajorities up there, and obviously the governor's a Republican, so we're very closely aligned from a philosophical standpoint. I'll give you a couple of examples, though, and Sam can chime in as well. We'll probably talk about the new education funding formula. That was a big deal, and probably the most complex, intensive legislative initiative I've ever been a part of, and certainly in the amount of money involved and the number of stakeholders involved. We're talking about over 1 million kids in K-12 schools and 140-something school districts. This is a big deal, but it was good, and we got it done, and we can go into detail on that. But there was a lot of conversations back and forth between the Department of Education, the governor's office, hearing from our local stakeholders here in Williamson County and across the state. All members were getting feedback from their school superintendents, their school board members, their county mayors, their county commissioners. So you just think about how many people have a finger in funding education and executing education. So it was really an interesting process. And we ended up getting it done, and there was pretty broad support to get that done. An example where our speakers, the Lieutenant Governor, Speaker of the Senate, and the Speaker of the House, were very passionate about truth in sentencing reform. meaning that when a judge imposes a sentence, that it's, if you sentence the person to 10 years, they should do 10 years, not do 2.5 years. And so that was something that the governor, who you know has been very passionate about criminal justice reform, he had some heartburn about the original way that the bill was drafted, and so there was negotiation on that, and we ended up in a good place. We ended up with a bill that the governor can sign. I think our speakers were happy with the final product. So it's just like any other bill. It's just the stakes might get a little bit higher when you're dealing with both the speakers of each chamber and the governor, as well as our members, and making sure that we can get 17 votes in the Senate, 50 votes in the House, which is what you have to have in order to pass anything.
Well, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, it's true, and again, that shows sometimes you have to compromise to get something passed, and the Senate led on this, and the House, and that we felt like that we owed it to the citizens of Tennessee that there is truth in sentencing, and so they worked out what I think was the best for Tennessee on how it came about, and I was glad to support it, and I appreciate Jack's leadership in that.
Let's dig on into some of the details on the education funding bill. Guys, the additional $1 billion got spread around Tennessee in various ways. How did Williamson County come out on those
Well,
numbers?
first of all, there was concern. Of course, Williamson County school system came out ahead. And we worked very closely with Superintendent Golden and Snowden on this, because we just didn't want to go off on a tangent on our own, and we want to make sure we look at the impact on our county. I talked a lot to Dr. Snowden about this because of the decline in enrollment in Franklin Special School District. They were, even under BEP, they would lose $2.5 million. So we worked together to make sure they were held harmless under this new plan the first year, and it'd be 25% reduction each year after that till they meet their enrollment numbers. We felt like they were going to lose money too under the BEP. We worked closely with that, and also I worked with the Tennessee Education Association too to see what they felt like would be the impact on the teachers. They basically remained neutral on this legislation because, like Jack said, the BEP was not working after this period of time, and yesterday during the debate, it went on for quite a while, and a lot of my Democrat friends and colleagues had reservations about it until Representative Johnny Shaw, a Democrat, one of the last rural Democrats in the state, stood up and said, "Folks, all I hear is criticism." He said, "There is some good things in this legislation he's going to support." He said, "Let's stop talking. Let's go back home, because it's going to be, a year or two before this is implemented. Let's talk to our constituents back home, our leaders, see what we could do to make it better when we come back in January, and then we can fix it then." He says, "We have to do something." And so Johnny Shaw...
I hear he was a little more to the point in those comments.
I can't repeat the words he said on the House floor. He is a minister, by the way. But it was let's say, come to Jesus meeting. And so that basically cut off the debate, and we moved ahead and approved the BEP, or excuse me, the TISA, as they call it, in the House.
Yeah. Jack, specifically Williamson County Schools, the last numbers I saw were another $20 million a year. Is that kind of where it leveled out? I saw there was some adjustment made for high cost of living areas. They must have heard us talking here a couple of months ago, or y'all must have carried that back to them. How does that work for us, though?
Yeah, that's the, no pun intended, the $1 million question. I think everybody wants to know, and our county commission, our school folks, how much more money will Williamson County get? Well, it's tough to answer that. It is just tough to answer, and here's why. It'll be positive, and it'll be positive to a significant degree.
Okay.
But the thing about this new formula, and the reason we supported it, is we're funding kids with the new formula. The current formula, we fund processes, we fund bureaucracies, we fund systems. This is a student-centered formula, and every dollar that comes from the state to educate a kid will be tied to that kid. Every child across the state will receive a base funding amount, $6,860. It doesn't matter if you're in Hancock County, Davidson County, Williamson County, Shelby County. Every kid gets that base funding amount. And that's to provide a teacher, a classroom, textbook, a bus, a school nurse, a counselor, all the things that go into educating a child. That's the base. And then you have weights, is what we refer to them as. And a child might receive an additional appropriation if they come from an economically distressed household or an economically distressed community. If they have a unique learning need, they have some type of special need, there will be additional money appropriated to that child. But it's all directed towards the child. So when you want to extrapolate that and try to figure out what's going to be the impact on a school system, Williamson County, Franklin Special, Davidson County, it doesn't matter. Well, you can kind of look at what they have now. You can look at their student population now and say they have this many English language learners. They have this many kids with special needs. They have this many kids from economically distressed households or Title I schools. We don't have Title I schools in Williamson County, but that's an example. So the good news is that when it comes time to fund that formula, you will have this data and the detail to be able to fund it. And that's a good thing. That'll provide greater accountability and transparency across the board. I can tell you for Williamson County, it will be in the tens of millions of dollars in terms of additional funding. Now, is that 20 million, 30, 40 million? You mentioned, and this was a late development, we did include, which I was fully supportive of, you're referring to CDF, cost differential factor. And that was not something that was contemplated in the original version of the formula. You know, Commissioner Bethard would tell you here it cost more, or Sheila would tell you it costs more to hire a teacher in Williamson County because of just the cost of living. It costs more to build a school in Williamson County than it does, say, in Upper East Tennessee. There's just different cost factors that are involved in operating a school system. And so I was very pleased to see that CDF added in at the last minute. And that would help about 5 counties based on current economic conditions, and certainly Williamson County is one of those. So that could mean an additional several $1 million to Williamson County. So it's a complex formula, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a much better formula. And you did hit that correctly, Dave. An additional $1 billion. This is the largest increase in funding for K-12 education in the history of the state, even adjusted for inflation at any time in our state's history. It's the largest increase. Now, Sam and I would tell you, we were not happy with just throwing more money after bad, good money after bad. I would not have supported the additional money for K-12 education if we did not redo the formula, because we want a better formula. It still puts us below some of our neighboring states in terms of the percentage of our economy that we dedicate towards K-12 education, but it puts us in a much better position. And to Sam's point, the full effectiveness will not be this coming school year, although $250 million additional recurring dollars will go into the coming school year, including $125 million for teacher salaries. The full implementation of the new formula and the full $1 billion will be the following school year.
Now, it's, you know, over the last several years, a lot of legislation comes down to party line votes. All the Republicans have a supermajority, so if the Republicans want it, all the Republicans vote against it, all the Democrats vote against it, and the Republicans vote for it. But this one had 6 Republicans that voted against it and 5 Democrats in favor of it, which is unprecedented, isn't it?
Again, it goes back to the perception, like Representative Shaw said. We needed to do something, but some, people probably faced local opposition to it, hearing from their teachers, or to vote for it or vote against it, and so they just were representing their constituents, and some of them may had a vested interest in it somehow too.
Okay, it was. I thought that was an interesting development, and interesting that y'all worked together with the other side apparently and got some things done.
Yes, and I would like to say Speaker Sexton has a good relationship with Leader Camper over on the House side. We work very well together most of the time, and again, you come down, 90% of the votes, you'll have 100% of the General Assembly voting yes on a, and I think there was one bill maybe that failed this year or two in the House, and Leader Camper even got one through this year that had received 50 votes. So, yeah, she's the Democrat leader from Memphis.
Right. Moving on, one of the other interesting pieces of the budget involved the Titans' proposed new stadium. And the media is saying the state's going to kick in $500 million for that new stadium. That may be a little bit of a mischaracterization as I understand it. Tell us exactly how that works and what the state's on the hook for and how that benefits the broad state of Tennessee.
I'll start from my perspective. I was born and raised in Nashville, native son. I remember Nashville, the tallest building was the LNC Tower. And I remember when I-65 was not here, or I-24. And so I've seen Nashville change over the years. Nashville contributes between 38 and 40% of all the tax revenue for the state of Tennessee. Think about that, how important Nashville is to the state of Tennessee. And Nashville has challenges that we do not have here in Williamson County. Let's agree to that. But you remember when the Music City Center was being built in Nashville, the pushback on that, it was a waste of government money and then, you know, it's going to cost this and cost that. Every Reagan dinner I've been to has been in the Music City Center. We're using the Music City Center to get the Republican National Convention here. So sometimes you have to step out and try to think deep on this. And so I supported that. I supported the 1% motel tax increase in Nashville because it will not go into effect unless they pass or this Titan Stadium goes forward, the new stadium. I don't know if you've been to the stadium. It's outdated, the one we have. And if you had told me 20 years ago Nashville would support a hockey team, I would not believe you, okay, because it just doesn't work down south. And look at the draw that the Predators have in Nashville. So I look on it as a benefit to the entire state. One of the most outspoken persons against that in the General Assembly, you know, was talking about the cost to his residents and stuff, but he didn't complain at all when he got $20 million for a water park in his district from the state of Tennessee a few years ago. So I look on it as a benefit for the entire state, not just to Nashville. And again, Williamson County benefits. When Nashville does well, we benefit here in Williamson County. When Williamson County does well, Nashville benefits. So that was my position on it, and I'm sticking to it.
Jack, you voted against it.
I did. In fact, I took it out of the Senate budget. I did. One of a rare moments. Sam and I are probably on a different page here. We're still friends. Look, I support targeted economic incentives when I can demonstrate that there is a quantifiable and discernible return on investment to the taxpayers. And let me give you an example. The Ford deal, an SK Innovations thing that we passed for West Tennessee at the mega site. And ironically, it was the same dollar amount. It was a $500 million incentive package and reimbursable grants to Ford and SK Innovations to build out their facility in West Tennessee, a $6 billion facility. So as they build it out, they can submit their expense receipts back to the state, and we'll reimburse them $500 million on that. 20,000 jobs when that is fully developed. And it's in an economically distressed part of the state. It's not Middle Tennessee, where we've got a lot of cranes. So I support economic incentives in certain circumstances, and the Ford deal for me was a slam dunk. That was a no-brainer deal. We will recoup billions and billions of dollars off of that, not to mention it's going to provide desperately needed economic stimulation to a depressed area of the state between Jackson and Memphis, okay? So I bring that up because we really hadn't talked a whole lot about the Ford deal because we did that in a special session back last fall. On the Titans thing, I love the Titans. I want them to be here. I think it would be great for downtown Nashville to have a covered stadium, to have a facility that you can use year-round for concerts and WrestleMania and tractor pulls and whatever else. That would be good. And you should also know that the Titans want to develop the 130-acre campus around their site. And last year, a year ago, I renegotiated the deal, the tax structure we have with the Titans. And that was back last year during our session and I was happy to work with them because they told us they wanted to renovate their stadium and they wanted to develop the campus around it. And what we set up for the Titans at that time is we said, you can continue to keep the sales tax revenue you generate inside the stadium. And that's fairly common we do that for the Predators, we do it for the Memphis Grizzlies, and that type of thing. So that's foregone revenue to the state. We're not getting it now, so it's not coming out of your pocket or my pocket. It's foregone revenue, but you can keep that sales tax. Additionally, last year, we said if you develop the 130-acre campus there around the stadium and put in restaurants and hotels and condos and office buildings, whatever, we'll let you keep half the sales tax from that, and we'll get the other half. Now, that deal I negotiated with the Titans last year was a good deal for the state of Tennessee. Nothing came out of our pocket. They're going to put all the money into developing it, and when it's done, we're going to generate revenue. We're going to generate tax revenue off of the 130-acre site. That's accretive. It is net revenue positive to the state. We're not putting any money in, and we're going to collect that half the sales tax on the side. Well, they went and looked at their stadium and said, you know what, this stadium we built is really not that well built. We're going to need to build a new stadium. And so they show up and say, hey, would you throw in another $500 million? Well, how are you going to pay that $500 million back? Where's the revenue? Where are we going to get that back? Well, they want to use the other half of the sales tax that was supposed to be what is net revenue positive to us. And I'm not even convinced that half the sales tax off the 130 acres will pay the debt service on the bonds over the next 20 years. So all I said was, not now. I need to see a plan. I need to see a plan. I need to see numbers. I want to see a map of the development. I want our fiscal review folks to be able to take that and crunch the numbers and say, look, this is going to generate this much in sales tax revenue. Bring it to me. Let me see. Is it at least a break-even deal? Or are we ultimately going to lose money on it? Now, as Sam said, and he's absolutely right, we're not, even though it passed over my objections, we're not writing a check to the Titans. We're not writing a check for anything. What we did is we authorized a bond issue when the stadium is completed, which could take 3 to 4 years. The governor's office will have the authority to issue bonds at that time against the stadium to reimburse for the cost of the roof, which would be $500 million. So I couldn't get there this year, maybe next year, maybe the year after that, as I see more detail on the plan. That's why I opposed it. But I didn't win this one. You know, I fought the good fight, but didn't win this one.
Personal flashback for me.
But I would like to say, see, he knows the details more than probably anyone else up there, and that's why I'm glad he's my senator.
We're glad both of you represent us. There's no question about that. Back in 1989, I was an alderman for the city of Franklin, and for whatever reason, I was the swing vote on whether to fund a streetscape downtown when we changed the square from square to round. And I wouldn't agree to fund it until they convinced me that the property taxes from those specific buildings would pay for it. And they jumped through a bunch of hoops and finally convinced so skeptical me that was actually going to be positive for the city of Franklin. And you can see how that's turned out. I did vote yes, but they had to. Yeah, but
I think you made the right vote.
Those things, you know, some of them that look a little shaky on the front end do turn out well. And I'm sure this one will too. And we're halfway through our show, and we've covered 2 out of 10 items on my list. Anything else in the budget that y'all want to mention? I know there were tons of smaller items, some of which benefit Williamson County.
A couple of high points on there, and thank you for that, because it is the most important thing we do. $280 million in tax cuts, obviously no new tax increases, a number of different tax cuts, grocery tax holiday. We're going to waive the state portion for renewing your car tags for the next year. We're trying to find creative ways to put money back in the pockets of Tennesseans. So almost $300 million going back to Tennesseans in tax cuts.
Right. And the professional privilege tax for doctors, and we're working on it for financial advisors.
No, you're not.
80% which live outside the state of Tennessee, but that we'll get there.
We're never going to get that one.
But anyway, also locally, in the appropriations, there was another over $3 million we worked on to get for complete the Carter House Visitor Center. That gives them, because of inflationary costs and COVID, the original $3 million was not going to get us there, and just small things like $50,000 appropriation for High Hopes to help them out, $350,000 across the state for Boys and Girls Club, and those are the kind of things. And during this budget process, that's one thing I like to say. It's not just us. I mean, there is a team of dedicated state employees up there. There are attorneys and staff working at midnight on Sundays and Saturdays to help us put this budget together, and also to create the legislation we do. So we cannot forget the people that really help us. We can come up with these great ideas, but to put it in legal terms and to make sure it's all balanced is a team of, the finance team up there, the lawyers, and the staffers. They work incredibly hard the last 2 or 3 weeks of session.
Sam, as chairman of the Transportation Subcommittee and member of the Transportation Committee in the House, please tell me that there's a lot more money in the budget for potholes and repaving some of these roads around here.
Yeah, that's true. Nothing has brought Americans together more than Putin and potholes. I would just say that. It makes us all united. Yeah, this has been an incredibly different season, and TDOT will say that the freeze cycles and the thaw cycles has helped create this. Also, TDOT has been experimenting with a new kind of asphalt that reduces spray from trucks. We don't know if that has worked out as well as we thought it would. But also, 40% of all potholes, I think, are in Middle Tennessee. And again, so that has brought a lot. And also, TDOT is short 30% of their employees, too. So you cannot do a lot of the repairs if the temperature is not right. And we did experience a much colder January, February, and parts of March on that. So they are working on it. They're dedicated, but they tried to do it during hours that with the peak traffic is not happening, but it will get there. And they do understand that this year has been different, and talk to TDOT leadership. In fact, I took the TDOT Region 3 team out and the chief engineer to Fairview this past week to talk about what we can do for Fairview in the future, particularly Highway 100 widening project. It's on the Improve Act. And also, they're moving forward, thanks to the former mayor down in Spring Hill. They're talking even about that intersection being done within a year. I'll believe that when I see it, but they are working on I-65, and that will help the traffic flow on 31. So what I want to do with Fairview is set the standard that the folks down in Spring Hill did over the years.
As former mayor of Spring Hill, Rick Graham, one of your signature things you left for Spring Hill was this interchange on I-65. So give us an update on it. I'm sure you know more about it than just about anybody in this room.
Well, it's just like Sam said, they're saying next spring it'll be functional. All we've seen right now is some barrels on the interstate on the side of the road, and but they are moving somewhat on the Alexander property, the June Lake area is what we're going to be calling it. So we're excited. All that work we did back in the grant we got from on the Bill grant, all that's coming to fruition, and I think TDOT says they're on schedule, so we're going to take their word for it.
Good. That will benefit a lot of folks in Spring Hill and even north of Spring Hill, where people come through Franklin trying to get to the places they work. Sam, go ahead.
And a lot of people have asked me, particularly folks who live on Lewisburg Pike, about the construction out there. And
Yes.
And so, well, TDOT, that's a state highway, and they had a 60-inch metal drain pipe that came off the battlefield property there, and it was rusting out. It was becoming a hazard. So they're putting in a large box culvert in there. It's, they said it may take 4 or 5 months, but I think they'll get it done sooner than that. I was out there the other day looking at it. So it will be a safety improvement, and they'll get it done as soon as possible.
We got two other really big things that we need to talk about. There's numerous important things that we could talk about, but Sam, you spent a lot of your energy this session on campaign finance and ethics reform, and you did that, I think, at the request of the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker of the House. You got a lot of input from them on this, and got a lot of things done in that area. Tell us a little bit about it. And
yeah, I'll give you the Reader Digest version real quick. And so we started it last session, last year, and something like this complicated takes time, and you want to make sure you do it right. And so it ended up in conference committee. There was differences between the House and Senate version, and I had the pleasure yesterday being the first conference committee with my senator, and we got together yesterday morning very early before session, and we worked out the differences. But I think we came up with a much better piece of legislation. And real quick, I'd just like to highlight, we are requiring expenditures to be no more itemized expenditures on for or any everything will be unitemized expenditures. So anything that we spend during our campaigns, whether it's $5 for coffee, has to be reported where we spend it and the location and the date. So I think that will help do a lot more transparency on how people are spending their money. The 501c4s, 60 days before an election, if they get involved, if they spend over $5,000 aggregate, getting involved with an election, let's say, for instance, they put Sam Whitson's picture on a poster or a mailer and what else, and send out, they have to report that they spent that money.
Time out and explain. What is a 501c4 and how is that different from a PAC?
A PAC, well, 501c4 is organizations that provide, they're nonprofits that provide information. For instance, like could be like the NRA or the Beacon Center and stuff like that. So sometimes these organizations, they will become nonprofits, but before an election, they will send out a mail piece or a radio ad that says, Sam Whitson is a dog lover. He doesn't care for cats. Just to try, I use that as an example, and try to influence the election. So what we have required is that if they get involved in an election 60 days before a primary or a general, and they spend over $5,000 to influence a campaign, they must just, we're not going to prevent them from what they're saying. They can still do what they've always done. It's just they have to report their amount of expenditures and how they do that. Because it's a lot of dark money could come in. Sometimes they could spend millions of dollars, or they could come in and collect a lot of money and not spend any of it. It makes their contributors say, well, what are they doing with it then? So this is just more transparency in the election process, and we know who and how much they're spending to influence an election.
Okay. Now, it seemed from the reports I read that the conservative groups like Americans for Prosperity and Tennessee Stands and some of those were coming unglued about this legislation. Why were they concerned?
I think they were concerned more about that their members would know how they're spending their money. The people who made
Why?
Again, this legislation has been out there over a year, and it wasn't until just recently that they brought up this issue. And we were kind of surprised, and I appreciate the leadership in the House and the Senate standing firm. Lieutenant Governor McNally really called them out and said, what is this really about? What are you really wanting to hide? And so you know when you do something like that and you get that kind of reaction, you have hit a nerve or something that people have, I think you're making progress when you do something like that.
And Jack, you're working side by side with the lieutenant governor, but he made a pretty strong statement. I'm going to read it. He was quoted as saying, "It's amazing that various seemingly legitimate groups are resorting to such disingenuous tactics to oppose it. Is it because they're spending so much that Tennesseans would be appalled if they knew, or is it that they spend so little that they fear they would be exposed as political grifters working only to enrich themselves?" Can you provide any color to the discussions going on your side of the fence?
One thing too, though, some groups, though, they do say they won't change, but they do take credit cards. That's the way I feel.
Got it.
Well, yeah, so a 501c4 is in IRS code, it's termed a social welfare organization. So think of it as issue advocacy. Obviously a 501c3, that's your charitable churches, whatever. And then you got 501c6s and that type of thing. But the 501c4, and you see a lot more of this maybe at the federal level than even at the state, but you do see some of it at the state, is exactly what Sam said. They can raise money. You don't have to disclose, and with our law, you don't have to disclose who's contributing. So somebody can give lots of money, and they can give a little bit of money, or they can get a lot of money or a lot of people give a little bit of money, or just 2 or 3 people give a lot of money. But you end up with an organization now that is out doing issue advocacy, perhaps talking about issues that to support whatever cause they wish to support. But when you cross that line into trying to impact the outcome of an election, then you are straying outside of what these organizations were designed to be able to do. As Sam said, nothing in the legislation we passed restricts them from doing anything that they want to do. It's just going to provide a little bit more transparency if they want to try to influence the outcome of an election. Now, a political action committee, that's what you do. I mean, that's what political action committees are for, but you disclose your donors, you disclose your expenditures, there's a lot more transparency. Because if somebody's out there trying to get somebody elected or defeated in an election, then we want to know where the money is coming from and what it's being spent on.
Great.
And some of the other things, too, that were significant in this legislation is that members of the General Assembly and their staff who are involved in campaigns have to disclose that. In the past, they didn't. Also, if you start a PAC, you have to provide a photo, and this came out of the Senate, which I thought was a great idea. You have to provide a photo ID of the members who's operating that PAC, so we know that they're real people. And also, we put more disclosure requirement documents that you have to retain. We found out in the TCA, members of the governor's cabinet were not required to file were able to take consulting fees. We had a commissioner that was getting $8,000 a month on the side from a utility, I think down in Chattanooga, and he was living on state property out at the old prison. We took care of that. And also trial judges were not required to file a disclosure statement, so we put that in. And also disclosure statements now also have to be signed under the penalty of perjury. So, and there's a lot more in this legislation, and I'm sure as we go forward throughout the year, we'll add more.
We'll get more into it. Sheila Cleveland, one of our school board members here with us, will be mad at me if we don't talk about the textbook library book bill that got negotiated there in the final moments of the session. Jack, what does that change in our state? Been a lot of media reports about parents that weren't happy with various books in our school system. So does this fix their concerns?
Well, I think we ended up with a better piece of legislation. There were numerous drafts out there that were being circulated around that I certainly would not have been able to support. We got to go back a little bit and talk about a bill that I sponsored for Governor Lee back earlier in the session, which was referred to as the Age Appropriate Materials Act. And what we're talking about here is just making sure that what we have in our school libraries and is age appropriate for kids. Yeah, and we don't want things that are not age appropriate in our libraries and all. So what we passed, the governor's legislation that we passed earlier in session just simply said that every LEA, and many already have this type of process in place, but every local education agency has to have a process in place where they post online on their website every single book that is in the school library. And again, many schools already do this. Back in I remember the Dewey Decimal System, right? Do you remember card catalogs? Well, obviously, it's far more modernized now, and so most districts have a digital file with everything that's in the library to make that publicly accessible so that parents, school board members, teachers can see that, just in the event that something slips in that maybe. And then the LE has to have a process in place for parents or school board members or stakeholders to be able to say, hey, I don't think that this is an appropriate book or appropriate material for kindergartners that shouldn't be in the elementary school library. And so we passed that earlier in session. Well, there were members that thought, well, maybe we need to go an additional step in that. And again, there were some really bad versions of the bill that were out there, but where we ended up passing, we just added to that to say that if a parent or a school board member or a teacher brings something to the attention of the LEA and says, hey, I don't think this is appropriate for first or second graders, and they challenge it, the LEA can address it, remove the book, take care of it. If they don't, and whoever made the initial objection still wants to pursue it, they can now appeal that decision to the textbook commission, and then the textbook commission can take a look at it and make a decision if that is indeed age appropriate. Some would argue should leave it 100% at the local level. We have wonderful people at our local level that I trust implicitly, but you don't necessarily have that all the way across the state. So just added that one extra element, if that makes sense.
Sheila, how does it look from your perspective?
Well, one of the things I realized that what you just said is originally I was thinking it was going to go straight to the textbook commission, and then it would take total control out of it. So this is a component I learned that's new into it. What about the list? Is that still on the table where librarians have to submit a list, or the state is submitting a list of appropriate books? That's totally off?
No, that was in a version of the bill that was out there. And again, there were a number of versions of language that were circulating out there. No, there's no master list from which librarians can pick and choose from. That will still all be decided at the local level. This only applies in the event that there is a concern from a parent or school board member, or teacher, other stakeholder, grandparent, that they identify something that's in the library that they don't think is appropriate. They come to the LEA and bring it to their attention. Y'all decide what you think is best, and if the original person who brought it to the attention is not satisfied, then they can take it up to the
Now, bring it
state
to
level.
the LEA, does the book need to be brought up to the board to vote, or is it just something operational that the superintendent decides, if there's a challenge with the library, that person can challenge and go to the state, or does it have to go through board approval? Because the one thing I'm trying to avoid is, especially what's going on now, is us being a book approval board. And that can get very messy and complicated.
I don't have the language in front of me. I'm 99% sure, no, it is an administrative function at the district level. It's not something that would come to the board. Now, ultimately, though, as you know, Sheila, y'all can overturn anything that's done administratively because you're the school board. But the initial review process will take place administratively at the district level. Now, if that parent or teacher or whoever is not happy with that, can they then come to the school board and ask you to intervene? Well, they can do that on anything, right? So certainly you could end up having to take it up, but that would be a decision for you all to make in the event that you wanted to do that.
And there was also a piece that I don't know if it's still in the was in the bill, or the amendment, was if a book was challenged and brought to the state at that level, and the state said, okay, we can remove it. The last amendment said that it could be statewide, then that particular book then gets pulled statewide.
No, it would only apply to that particular library and that particular school.
Okay.
That's where it would be. Now, it's going to be known statewide that decision was made by the State Textbook Commission, so a parent who shares that concern and Knox County might go through the same process. So it could end up having some state, but it's not an automatic statewide effect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. I knew she could ask better questions than I could about that, so you might as well use your audience to your advantage. Sharon Guffey, our juvenile court judge in Williamson County, were there any bills that they were discussing that would affect your operations and the kids that you try to help?
It was pretty quiet for us this year, thankfully. We've smoothed out JJ reform, and we had a few things we were involved in as a council, judges council, but nothing really to speak of, thankfully.
Good.
It's okay. Thank you.
Just wanted to give you an opportunity to ask these guys the hard questions that I might have missed. And
Dave, that is a good point you just made there. We do work closely with our constitutional officers, our commissioners, and our judges. For instance, the judges, Judge Woody Woodruff came to us and wanted to create a probate master position here in Williamson County, and we carried a bill that created that.
good, good. Do y'all want to talk about the transgender athlete bill for a little bit? Probably not. Go ahead. Understand we've got, go ahead, Sam, and tell us what y'all did for the transgender athletes.
We just, in the House version, and I'm sure it was approved in the Senate, is that it just prevents an individual, particularly a male, deciding today that he wanted to compete in female sports, and that's just not going to be allowed under our law.
Okay.
Keeps us from being sued also by the female athletes that are impacted by this.
Good. I understand you also kicked the homeless people off public property. Is that something that had to be done, Jack?
Yeah, so, a few years ago, y'all may recall, in the wake of some protests and stuff, we had people that were pitching tents and setting up camp on Legislative Plaza, out in front of the Capitol, on the grounds of the Capitol. I mean, basically setting up homeless camps. And we have school kids and buses that come and bring, kids to tour the Capitol, and it was creating an unsafe environment. And so we passed legislation to make it a crime to erect a dwelling, and I can't remember the exact, but we were very specific with our language. Somebody said, so if it's a beautiful summer day and I want to take my kids and go down to Legislative Plaza and lay out a blanket and have a picnic lunch, and one of my kids falls asleep and is taking a nap out there, is that a crime? Well, of course not. Of course not. But we were very intentional and specific with our language that you're not going to erect, any type of dwelling, a tent or an encampment or things like that. And we put a list of things in there. We have some problems, not so much here in Williamson County, but in Putnam County and Cookeville. For whatever reason, it's become a big, big problem there. And there are large homeless camps, and they're being set up in public areas, parks, and public right-of-ways and things of that nature. All we did is we simply made it permissive that a local government can decide, if they choose to do so, to enact what we passed for state capitol grounds for their community. And we didn't force it. We didn't say it is illegal. We just said that a local government, if the city of Franklin or Williamson County decided at some point that they wanted to be able to enforce that same law that we passed for the capitol grounds, they can do so.
This is a little off topic, I guess, this morning. This didn't involve the state, but a very visible political event happened this past week, Tuesday night. And the Brownland Farms development here in Franklin was turned down unanimously by the board here at Franklin. Matt Brown is the alderman in that area of the town. What happened, and what's going to happen with that property, Matt?
Well, first of all, I think what ultimately happened is first and foremost the community really let their opinions known. I mean, that was such an amazing, just a show of opposition against a development that just really wasn't wise for us. The community's been saying they want smart growth, and I think that was an example of growth that just wasn't smart for our community. I applaud the board. Ann and I were out on an island there, literally, on that first vote and took a nice defeat. But the second time around, I think everybody saw what we were seeing early on this was not good for our community. Now, what could happen of it? I am really, really hopeful that we see something equestrian, that we see something park. This is a beautiful piece of property. It has been an economic driver for our community for a long time. I really do think, and I think there's some people out there who would love to see us do something very meaningful that instead of creating fear and angst, actually create some real excitement and energy in our community.
Okay, great, Matt. Appreciate the color on that. And Lena Bell, one of our local Franklin Special School District board members and a good friend. What's your son's name that used to play with Johnny?
Oh, Trace, yes. Good. I have a senior this year also. Yes. I think one thing that I wanted to say, first of all, thank you for having it on TV. It allowed me to take my son to school and then slip in here. So I really appreciate it. There were a couple of things that I wasn't quite sure when you guys were talking about charter schools. I didn't get a chance to hear if you guys wanted to table that or have a little bit more conversation. But before I get to that, I wanted to thank Sam for the courage in your campaign finance bill that you that passed. And what I appreciate is two things. First, that you reached across the aisle, and I was one of those that was cooking and cleaning yesterday, watching you guys while you were just handling the General Assembly. And I really appreciate the fact that you had conversation from some of your other colleagues that allowed them to share how appreciative they were of the details that you put in that. And I just strongly feel that we need more accountability. And having said that, with the charter schools, my biggest concern is if charter schools were similar in like public schools with all the accountability and all the detailed metrics that we have to follow through in order for us to be the best fiduciary for our constituents, I would be for it. But they don't go through the professional development, they don't go through all of the minute details, and they don't have the accountability, frankly. And that is disheartening because they're going to be taking dollars from us, and yet you say you want accountability, but we're not going to know where some of those dollars go. The other thing I want to challenge you guys with is anybody in the General Assembly, and I appreciate wholeheartedly that you guys set a standard where you come into our schools, you see our schools, you have interaction with us as school board members, but most of those in the General Assembly have not stepped into a public school probably ever, if I can be honest. And they do not know what is happening in those schools. And yet they're able to make laws and and create bills that truly they're clueless on, and it's just because it's coming from a couple of people that have tickled their ears. So anyway, I really, really want accountability all over the spectrum.
Okay,
We're out of time, but Jack,
you're out of
respond
time.
to
But thanks, Elena. Always appreciate the conversation. We did absolutely nothing to do with charter schools this year. Not a single piece of legislation. We didn't advance charter schools. We didn't do anything. And at the end of the day, you and Sheila and your colleagues will decide whether or not there's a charter school in your district. Okay, I want to make sure that's clear because we didn't do anything with charter schools. We didn't increase funding. We didn't make it easier. We didn't make it more difficult. We left local control in terms of when and where there is a charter school. So appreciate your comments and feedback, and we've talked about it before. I just didn't want people to watching this thinking that we did something for or against charter schools this year, because we did not.
We will, I'm sure, revisit that topic again. And it's what I love about this format that we have here, because we have such an interesting mix of public officials and citizens to come in here and help us get into details, Jack and Sam. the other representatives are so good to be here and give us an opportunity to understand kind of how the process works and how things have shaken out the way they have. So hope that all you'll come back and bring friends with you. We've got other people out here that I could ask a lot of questions, but we're out of time. It's been a great session today. I want to thank everyone that it takes to make these events happen. First of all, the local McDonald's organization here is providing free coffee, better deal than the senior coffee, because it's free here, guys, and you don't have to be a senior. So we want to thank them for being here. There will be free coffee to all teachers next week, all educators, in honor of the Teacher Appreciation Week, and they wanted us to mention that. So if you're a teacher, coffee, soft drinks, and so forth are free next week at most of the local McDonald's. I think there's one or two that are not part of that organization, but most of them in Williamson County. Creed Henderson and the crew back there, thank you, Creed, for making us look good on TV. Tom, the WAKM connection is valuable to us, and we appreciate you getting us on the air there. We got financial assistance from AT&T and from Vanderbilt University, thanks to Dennis Wagner and the crew there. And it takes a village at the chamber. The quarterback, Kel McDowell, and Nancy. Yeah, I've got them written down because I knew I'd forget somebody. Nancy, Abby, Jenna, Matt. We appreciate the support y'all provide. And last but not least, Columbia State makes us feel very welcome. We got a bunch of you in the audience, and I'm afraid to try to mention all names, but we sure appreciate the venue here, and look forward to being back here next month on May 27th. And we thought we were going to be another session with them, so we haven't gotten anybody else booked yet, but we'll let you know. Hope you'll be back with us, and look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much.